I'm speaking with Elder Holland, a senior leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Utah. Jeffrey, how are things in Utah, in Salt Lake City, and what is the impact of COVID-19, particularly on the Latter-day Saints?
Well, it's been sobering and sad. We've missed our association with each other. We've been under the same restrictions that much of the rest of the world has been. I dare say in the West here, things may be improving slightly, but we're not eager. We're not being aggressive or too assertive in that. We want to be safe. We want to be cautious. But it's been a long stretch, as it has been for everyone, and that has led to the cancellation of church services. Of course, our temples, our holiest sites, have been closed. We've had our missionaries withdrawn from almost all of the countries. They've all returned essentially to their home countries. So it's had a dramatic impact on us. Hope springs eternal, and it is spring here, and we want things to get better for the whole world. But it's been difficult. It's been a sad thing. We've missed one another.
Well, that yearning for one another is a theme of many of these conversations. That there's something ironic about the fact that it takes being in isolation or social isolation for us to appreciate how much we do need one another.
Exactly. Actually, Ed, that's one of the thoughts I've had in anticipation of this chat, is that we probably take for granted the sweet association that we have just in the community generally, but I think that's particularly true in a religious congregation. We do need each other. We lean on each other. We congregate for a reason. Communion has 2 or 3 levels of meaning for people together, and we have missed that. And I'm particularly mindful of the elderly and some of the most vulnerable with this virus, the most vulnerable physically and in terms of the invasion of the virus. But they're also the most vulnerable in terms of missing that association, missing some care and attention, and the Christian neglect has been maybe not intentional neglect, but enforced neglect has been, I think, most painful on the elderly, and they're the ones who I worry about the most, really, in all of this.
So what are you actually doing about that? You've identified a major concern, the people who are most vulnerable. What can the Latter-day Saints do specifically about helping the elderly?
Well, one thing that we try to do, Ed, in our church, we have a system of care for one another. We just used a shorthand scriptural term of ministering. But we have quite literally assigned people to each other so that every person in our congregations are covered with a friend, an associate, someone who can watch out for them. Now, we're under the same restrictions other people are in terms of movement. Some of that can't be face-to-face. So that's a very limiting factor. But with technology, with telephones and email and social media, whatever we can put together, we have tried to actually be in touch with every member of our congregation regularly. Congregations, plural. This would be true all over the world. That sometimes that's easier than other times. Sometimes it's easier in some places than other places. But it is something I'm pleased about in our church organization. We hope that it works well. We hear wonderful stories of care and compassion that is being shown, but at least we are organized that way prior to a pandemic, so we didn't have to scramble too much to put that together. We just have to make sure we're doing it now with the best means possible.
And the representatives of the church who came back presumably had to leave their communities behind. So what's happened to those communities in different parts of the world that were being ministered by adherents of the Latter-day Saints?
Well, fortunately for those, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, where some left, others returned. So if you had my own mission earlier in my life was to the UK, and so I would have come back from the UK to the US, but we have UK young men and women serving in the US, and they would have returned to England or to Wales or to Scotland or whatever. That won't quite be a one-to-one, but there is a sustaining force of both missionaries, the young men and women, the 19 and 20 and 20-year-olds, but also the mature leadership of the church, the local leadership. We would have those in place all over the world, and they would not have been in any way evacuated or gone to another country. They would be under some quarantine depending on local restrictions, but they wouldn't be out of place. They would be on site.
Many of the viewers of this interview won't be familiar with the Latter-day Saints, won't be familiar with the scriptures of the Latter-day Saints, and I wonder whether there are aspects of either your scriptures or part of the history of the church that can help people understand what they're going through at the moment.
Well, that's a wonderful question, Ed. I do think there is something reasonably unique in our history, kind of painful in our history, that shows the need for each other and the care we have to give each other. I think we're the only church, at least the only church in America that I know of, that has had an extermination order issued against it. That was in the very early days of our history. But this is a congregation that was driven from state to state to state to state, and finally into the wilderness of the great Western Basin of America. And all we had was each other. We did not have the support of government or a great many friends. We leaned on each other. I say we collectively about our ancestors. And that's certainly not the case now, but it is a memory that we have. It is a lesson that we learned where you cared for each other, you watched out for your neighbor. We're trying to look at this in a wider way, a larger way, beyond just a current health crisis. We'd like to think that it's a true Christian opportunity to remember what the way we should be living, the way we should be serving, whatever the circumstance, whatever the temporal or spiritual condition of our neighbor.
Well, we're drawing towards a close, and I have two further questions. One deals with the question of localism. I wonder whether one of the results of this pandemic is that we're going to be focusing more on what can be done locally rather than what can be done from one centre or what can be done internationally. And I wonder whether you'd agree. A number of participants in the COVID-19 Chronicles have talked about the importance of the local over and against the regional, national, or international.
I don't think there's any question that we need to think more and more locally. Someone said, survey large fields and cultivate small ones. So we are global citizens. We are a global church. 16 million or so around the world and growing, but almost all action with most political and social effectiveness, almost all action needs to be localized, and we have a serious strong effort to decentralize here. Have done in this pandemic. We've had 500 projects around the world in something like 120 countries. So we have been looking at the globe, but almost all of those have been implemented and dealt with and managed locally. So there, if you can get that, we think there's a combination there of some management from headquarters, but implementation almost completely locally, including projects that we've done in the UK.
And one final question, which is the the role of the church building, if you like. So
Yes.
much of the church has been about going to the temple or going to a place, taking part in liturgy and services and so on. And of course, that's not going to be possible, at least in the months ahead. Maybe in a year, we will be able to sit down next to each other in a pew, but that's not possible. So do you think that one of the consequences of COVID-19 is actually particularly churches such as the Latter-day Saints will have to rethink the role of the building, that you will no longer be building based?
That's a astute observation, and I think we were blessed, we were fortunate in advance, a couple of years actually prior to this pandemic. We had begun a serious move in our curriculum to a phrase that we use, that we would be more home-centered and church-supported, as opposed to church-centered and home-supported. The spirit of your question is, I think, will this change things permanently? And I think, and in fact, it will. I believe that we will have the buildings. We do want to congregate, but I don't think the buildings will be seen as essential, as absolutely crucial. If those buildings aren't available in some remote part of the world or some emerging area where we haven't developed as much, we'll be okay. We'll work in homes, or we'll find ways to have families get together in a non-traditional way, non-traditional in the sense that they don't have a chapel to go to, but we'll still meet, we'll still teach, and we'll still worship. So we actually were fortunate enough to have a little bit of an advantage on that. We got about a year's experience in before this pandemic hit, and we'll continue it after it's over.
Elder Jeffrey Holland, thank you very much.